everybody ready? You have a drink of water, whatever you need. Here we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Loop and Learn T1D Speaker Series. And today is just, you will learn a lot today. I know I say that all the time, but really, you learn a lot. Our guest today is Lane Desborough, who is the CEO of NudgeBG, which is a startup, a very new startup, but Lane's been in the diabetes sector for a very long time, and you will hear and learn a whole lot. So we're going to go through our usual disclaimer that Loop is a do-it-yourself closed-loop algorithm, and while it may seem obvious, please consult your healthcare professional regarding your diabetes management. Remember, this project is highly experimental, not FDA approved for therapy. We are not giving you medical advice. We are not doctors, and therefore we do not give you specific medical advice. We help you to understand the loop. Therefore, you take full responsibility for building and running this system, and do so at your own risk. And just kind of nod to yourselves and say, yes, I agree, yes. All right, let's take this down a little bit more. I just want to point out, as I have been the last couple of times, the new website called LoopANDLearn.org. If you haven't checked it out, go check it out. If you haven't signed up for the newsletters are kind of amazing, and they will send you updates of important announcements. They will send you some hot tips. They'll tell you about the speakers. All you have to do is open your mailbox. But check out the website. We're using that quite a bit to refer people as they build and learn to use Loop. And I just have to do a shout out because this is an amazing team of people. You probably can't even imagine how many messages go back and forth each day, probably each hour, sometimes depending on time zones. Marion joined us. She's been looping forever, but she is now taking over and making the website whiz bang amazing. Thank you, Marianne. She's working with Ivana, Carol, and Barb, who also just recently retired. And Mark Oldham is the one who started all of this nonsense and got us going just before Christmas. And Kenny Fox is a major contributor. If there's something you want to see on the website, if there's information you want, or you'd like to see an article, just let us know what you like. We have a whole list of things that we'd like to kind of bring to your attention. So much of it is how do you actually run Loop and how do you live with it? And the articles that are coming out are just amazing. So just quietly say thank you to all these people. It is rather amazing. So I'm going to stop sharing, but I just want to speak for a moment because this is becoming very, very apparent to me, and I just wanted to share this. And it's not something you don't know, but diabetes is an extraordinarily complicated and demanding disease. And the pancreas is only second to the brain in its complexity. There are neurotransmitters in the brain that are similar to those found in the pancreas, and that's quite an oversimplification. But there's research that the beta cells may have originated or co-opted the neural programming from the brain. That's way too deep for what we're going to talk about today, but enough to understand the amazing complexity and why there isn't a cure yet. It's complicated. The diagnosis of diabetes profoundly impacts the patient, his or her family, and all aspects of his or her life from that day forward. So living with diabetes takes a huge effort to manage, and it is unrelenting. This is, again, nothing that you don't know. Researchers are working on finding a cure to the many variations of the disease, not just 3 types of diabetes, learning how to fool the immune system and replace cells, and developing faster forms of insulin, better infusion technology, smarter closed-loop insulin delivery systems, all in an effort to reduce our daily burden of living with diabetes. I just wanted to take a moment to tell you how remarkable I think all of you are for tackling this disease 24/7, never stops, helping each other, choosing the best technology that we have access to, learning constantly how to run the technology better, and pressing for better tools and technology and continued access to our data. I'm reminded every day, like several times a day, that you're all the epitome of resilience and humanity. So please just take a moment, give yourself a whole bunch of appreciation for what you do every single day. I'm really honored to be involved with this group of people, and thank you. You make all of us better people, and you really feel good about yourself because it is extraordinary. Okay, done with the talk. Let me tell you about Lane Desborough. I'm very excited that he's joining us today. He is regarded as the pioneer in the automated closed loop insulin delivery systems, and he is currently CEO of NudgeBG, a Southern California startup that was just registered, if I'm correct on this, in January of this year.
Last year.
Last year, okay. I'd seen October of last year, but okay, 2020. Lane was formerly the chief engineer at Medtronic Diabetes before co-founding Bigfoot Biomedical in 2014, which actually took over the intellectual property from Asante Snap pump technology. Lane's work in automated insulin delivery is personal, as his son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2009. He has also been instrumental in the DIY movement, co-creating Nightscout with John Costik in 2013, and being the first to say that year at the annual DData and DiabetesMine meeting, "We are not waiting," which is now hashtag "We are not waiting," which then became quickly the mantra for this T1D community. With Nudge, Lane is aiming for an AID system open to a group of people much broader than those only on pumps. So pay close attention. This is really a different approach. He's focusing on two principles: simpler is better, and allowing users to choose their own levels of engagement. Ultimately, NudgeBG's goal, and Lane, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is to create a system requiring less effort than existing sensor-augmented pumps and hybrid closed-loop systems, and with better outcomes than MDI or open-loop pump therapy. To this end, NudgeBG will be a fully closed-loop algorithm that does not require meal or exercise inputs. On the name NudgeBG, Lane explained that the system is designed to nudge basal insulin in response to CGM data. I can go on with this, but I'll let him do that. He has a BA in chemical engineering with management sciences from University of Waterloo in Ontario, and an MS in chemical engineering and process control from Queen's University. He is an ultra marathon runner. He can show you his hands from a recent accident, a skier, and a sailboat racer. So with all of that, he has time to talk to us, and we're very, very honored. So Lane, thank you. It's yours. You can share screen or whatever you're ready to do. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Joanne. And for everyone who took time out of their Sunday evening, it's just testament to the level of passion and engagement we have in this amazing community. One of the first things I was told when we joined this community is T1D is the club you don't want to be in, but once you're in it, you realize there's a whole bunch of wonderful people. I've met I'm privileged to have befriended so many people in this community over the last 10 years. It's just incredible. So what I would like to do, well, first of all, I have to say it was tough for me to pick out which shirt to wear tonight because I have quite a few shirts here. I've got my Medtronic shirt, I've got my Nightscout shirt, I've got my Bigfoot shirt, I've got my Tide Pool shirt. So I figured I wouldn't play favorites and I would just wear a general shirt. So let me see if I can share my screen. Is that showing now?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So having done essentially nothing but think about diabetes for the past 10 years, as you can imagine, I've assembled some thoughts, quite a number of thoughts, and I'm going to attempt to share a number of those tonight. So put your seatbelts on. This is going to be a fairly intense set of things. And I will say it's not all good news, and it's not all answered questions. I think that I might be providing more questions than answers tonight. But something my mother told me many years ago, as our children were growing, she said, in her observation that children go through sort of nonlinear growth phases where they might go from not being able to roll over, or from crawling or walking. And what she said to me is something that I think is testament or representative of what we're seeing in the AID community right now. She said, Lane, right before a big milestone, you will see the child be frustrated. They'll be cranky, and you won't know why. It's like, why is my little child all of a sudden so ornery? It's because they're on the cusp of something great, but they're frustrated by their inability to do that thing. So I was trying to reconcile, why am I so frustrated right now? I think I'm frustrated because I can see and feel what's coming, but we're not there yet. I have a path to the answer, but this is an incredibly challenging ecosystem that we're in right now, and I'm going to expose you to some of that. So please don't take what I'm about to say as negative or despairing. I just see it that we're on the cusp. And I think, a parallel situation we were in was 8 years ago when the DIY community came onto the scene. We knew that we needed to do better, and the community came and rose to the challenge. So I think we're on the cusp of something new. Okay. Yeah. So just a quick whoops. So the title here is, which hat am I wearing? Am I a DData? Am I a hacker? Am I an embedded lead user? Or am I an engineer? I'm all of those. I'm going to describe a little bit about me from each of those lenses. So the first thing, I'm a runner. I'm a sailboat racer, pretty serious about both of those things. I've actually lived all over the world, born in England, grew up in Canada and the United States, currently live in north of LA in Thousand Oaks, California, but have been just privileged in my career and leisure to visit many different places around the world. I have 3 kids and my wife. So Hayden over here is the reason I'm here today. He's my son with type 1 diabetes. The other thing I'd like to point out, although I'm an engineer and my father's an engineer, I come from a long line of being surrounded by nurses. So my grandmother was a nurse, my mother's a nurse, my wife is a nurse, and my daughter just graduated from nursing school very proudly in late last year. So I do have nurses on hand to get that balanced perspective. And Joanne, as you said, I've spent a career doing lots of different things. And it really wasn't until my son's diagnosis in 2009 that I knew anything about diabetes. In fact, I didn't know anything about diabetes. So I'd grown up in other areas of automation, primarily industrial automation with these companies that either make chemicals or they make industrial control systems or they do smart grid power generation stuff. And I will be talking a little bit about Nightscout, and Nightscout sort of played in. I didn't put it on my career path because it was a little bit of a deviation from the path, which I had some reasons for doing that. So this is really what precipitated our life change, was the announcement in 2009 in August when Lisa, my wife, called and said, come to emergency. It looks like Hayden has diabetes, no prior history. Everybody's got their story about how diabetes came into their life. We committed at that point to do anything we could to help him, and really had no idea how far that commitment would take us and essentially be all consuming. One of the very first things we did, given my proclivity for automation, was to immediately start looking for trials of automation. And sure enough, there was this incredible trial at Stanford University. There's Dr. Bruce Buckingham there ministering Hayden. He's connected up to a prototype system on a laptop. This is very early days, 2009. But the fundamental question I had is, if automation is working in all these other safety critical systems, why wouldn't it work for insulin delivery? And it turns out, like many things in life, I do not have any original thoughts. Other people had already thought that, and there was already a well-established community of researchers looking at exactly this problem. In fact, people that I knew, there's a huge crossover between chemical engineering, process control, and automated insulin delivery. But my last job at General Electric, where I was working when Hayden was diagnosed, was in remote monitoring of power plants. So we had, I think, 1,000 power plants all over the world with, we were bringing thousands of sensor values every, 3,600 times a minute, 60 hertz, to this big central monitoring place, and we could look at what was going on in a gas turbine combined cycle power plant in Saudi Arabia. So then Hayden gets diagnosed, and I'm thinking, well, how come I can see a Saudi Arabian power plant on my iPhone, but I can't see what's going on with his blood glucose 30 feet away? How come Lisa and I are dragging ourselves out of bed 3 times a night to see if he's okay? There's no technical limit to why this is happening, or why we can't do this. So let's do something about it. And that's where John Costik and I hit it off. And this is essentially where Nightscout was born, as Joanne said, at the 2013 DData exchange, where it was really us bringing two complementary technologies together. John had figured out how to get the values off of the CGM, and I had done the much easier thing of building a website, and we just merged things, and the rest, as they say, is history. This is one of the very first prototypes of Nightscout. It looks pretty boring. There's actually a reason for that, and what I'm about to show has never, to my knowledge, been discussed before. There's a set of skills and experience in industrial automation that are quite uncommon. It's not like building an app for email or Angry Birds or a game. There are some very specific things that have been figured out, often after a tragedy, of how do you design automation systems in a way that the human is able to succeed at their task. So having spent, 20 odd years in industrial automation, I had some knowledge of how do you design things in a cockpit for a pilot in commercial aviation? How do you design something in a control room for 24/7 operation of an oil refinery? So that boring Nightscout display that I just showed you actually has a whole bunch of embedded thinking in it. I think this really, I would draw a parallel with something like Google, where Google also has a very simple user interface, and a simple system belies the complexity of the effort that went into its development. So this was actually what might appear elegant and simple and even dumb, I would argue had some very solid principles in it during its design. So let's see, we are not waiting. There's the first time it was ever written down. Howard Look wrote it down. Howard Look launched the hashtag, and here's a bunch of just amazing D-dads here, and how they have sort of played through the community over the years. Scott Markey and I worked together at Medtronic, and he's now doing something at Amazon. He has a son with type 1. This is another picture that I don't think the world has ever seen before. This is me setting up the very first Nightscouts. I think these are the first ones ever built for somebody else, building it for Howard Look and Brandon at Tidepool and Jen Schneider, who's now at Mode AGC, or was at Mode AGC. And as I was building these 3 systems, I was taking notes of, and this is only 4 pages of the, I think 10 pages of that install. And I thought, this is like crawling through broken glass. This is incredibly challenging to set these systems up. So we figured there'll be like 10 people in the world who are ever going to use this thing. Well, I think now we know that that's not exactly what happened. I joked that this created filled such an unmet need that people were willing to learn a new language. Like, I'll learn Swahili if that's what it takes for me to help my loved one be safe, or to be able to share my data. So it just unbelievably took off. This is another picture from about the same period with actually taking in my kitchen the night before we went in and all went in and told Medtronic what we thought of how we should be collaborating with them. And as you can see, this community, this amazing group of people has stayed in the community and gone on to all sorts of different and interesting things. We could never have imagined this, 7 years ago. But that being said, I want to go back to this original simple design of Nightscout. There's this thing called the performance preference paradox, where if you show somebody something, they might prefer it, but when you measure their performance in using it, it actually does worse. So there's this dilemma between what people prefer and how they perform against it. And this is where we started to see a little bit of a deviation in Nightscout, and honestly, me starting to step away from this. So it originally really attempted to subscribe to some of those principles that I shared earlier, making it glanceable, shared situational awareness, no configuration, blah, blah, blah. And I think Ben West is on the call here, and he would probably empathize that influencing the technical direction of Nightscout was like herding cats. It was really, really exciting, and my hat is off to Ben for his valiant attempts to do so. And we wound up with the system that it is today, which is pretty amazing. But as you can see, it's deviated a little bit from my original intent. And just simple examples of there's lots of things to configure now, and it's lots of color. There's lots of, I call this the Christmas tree version of Nightscout, which is fine. But again, this sort of difference from my original intent. The other thing that we found in looking at this amazing community is there's this concept of donkey work and horse work. Donkey work is the boring bug fixes, documentation, and the horse work is the exciting stuff of the new features. And you know what? Most people don't want to do the horse work, or most people want to do the horse work. They don't want to do the donkey work. And when you're dealing with a volunteer army, you have no influence over what people work on. So again, herding the cats. So it's just amazing that Nightscout community has continued to thrive and grow despite some of these challenges that were presented. So the other little detail about Nightscout, this was happening, we were hacking the Dexcom CGM while I was leading the 640G predictive low glucose management engineering team, while I was the chief engineer for Medtronic Diabetes. So you can imagine that put me in a slightly uncomfortable position of hacking the competitor's medical device, class 3 medical device, while I was chief engineer. So I knew that there was this article coming out in the Wall Street Journal in 2014. I had been interviewed for it. I knew it was coming. Medtronic knew it was coming, and I didn't know what they were going to write about me. And if they had written that I worked at Medtronic, I expected to lose my job the day that this paper came out. So I was sort of hunkered down, preparing to be taken into the president's office and told, you can't work here anymore. So fortunately, that didn't happen. But I really felt that I was in a conflict, that I needed to make a choice. And this was really where I transitioned, first of all, stepping away from Nightscout, and then ultimately leaving Medtronic a few months later to join Bigfoot with Brian Maslish and Jeffrey Brewer. And it was funny, about a year later, this article was written about me in Harvard Business Review, the innovative mindset your company can't afford to lose. Really talking about how you want to bring people in who are from the community and leverage their skills and experience and awareness of the customer domain. So this is a little bit of a segue into sort of outside of Nightscout, my primary roles in these three companies, Medtronic, Bigfoot, and now Nudge, where I would assert that I've worn two hats. One is as an embedded lead user, and the second is as an engineer. So what's an embedded lead user? Turns out there's a definition for these things, but basically it's somebody that you bring into a company who understands the user domain because they are a user. They are using the product, the firm's products or services, and they're sharing information. They are trying to help the company understand and meet the needs of the users. So actually, the woman who wrote this paper, Christina, I was on a call with her last week, the week before, and she was describing all the benefits of embedded lead users and how wonderful it is. And the case study she was using was actually Patagonia, which is headquartered just down the road from me in Ventura, of mountain climbers and surfers and all of those embedded lead users, and how great everything was. And I said to her, well, it's actually been my experience that it's not all sunshine and roses and happiness as an embedded lead user in the diabetes space. Just for fun, and I had a little help with a very good friend of mine this afternoon, I built a little spreadsheet of the people I know in the community who have been involved as embedded lead users in this list of companies here. So there's about 75 people that I know personally who have played through this community, and there are a number of challenges here. I've highlighted the three companies that I've been involved in, and these are basically in rank order of the number of lead users. So Tidepool, Bigfoot, Dexcom, and Medtronic have all, at various times, either because of their size or because of their desire to be engaged with the community, have hired many more embedded lead users than others. But there's some challenges with this. Agency, who are you representing? Do you represent the masses, or do you represent the lead users? That's the question. How do decisions get made even when you're there? Is it data versus opinion? Everybody's experience with type 1 diabetes is unique. And when and where are you asked for this input? There were conflicts. I've seen conflicts in functional expertise versus diabetes knowledge, where subject matter experts in, say, user experience design might be treated as second-class citizens and see the people with diabetes as threats to their expertise. Another huge problem is that what's your allegiance to? Is it to your diabetes peeps, to your community, or is it to your company's IP? Because you sign something when you join these companies saying every thought that comes into your head is now owned by Bigfoot or Dexcom or Medtronic. So you have to choose. You can't do both. You can't contribute to your community. So companies are still a long ways from being able to reconcile that. And then speed, right? Things you can do very quickly when you're just doing it for yourself or your loved one versus now trying to do it at scale. It can be pretty frustrating. And you figure out why companies act the way they do. And then the other little detail here is that in safety critical regulated industries, like what we're doing here, you can't legally be a lead user. You can't, it would be like Boeing and saying, well, I'm just going to go, take that plane out and fly it before it's been FAA certified. You can't do that. So it's a huge challenge. And so what I would say in summary is being a lead user for, I think, myself and for many in the community isn't actually that much fun. There's an opportunity here for growth and improvement of that relationship. Okay, so shifting a little bit to my engineer hat, which is really fundamentally what I think of myself as an engineer. I'm going to start off with a little example here. So I promise you there's only two equations in this entire talk tonight, and this is the first one. This is some C++ code from a closed loop system that I've been working with, exposed to over the last year. And this is a simple, what's called an exponential filter, where you take a raw value and you smooth it by taking some fraction of the last value of the smoother multiplied by the current value of the raw. So I saw this code and I thought, I think there's a problem with this. It should really look like this. It's got a plus here that it shouldn't. And what that plus does in C++ is it adds the original value of smoothed as well. So in fact, what this equation was doing was 1.7 and 0.3. So you think, oh, well, that's no big deal. 1.7 isn't that different from 0.7. Well, if you plot out what happens, this is the red line is what was supposed to happen, and the yellow line is what would actually happen with this code. And this is zoomed in, well, this is 6 to 10. In like 15, 20 iterations of this, it's already climbed to 5,000. Like this would kill somebody. And this had been latent in this code for a long time. And I was the first person to see it. So this is just a reminder that we're not dealing with normal software here. One plus sign in one piece of code, in a mountain of code, can completely change the behavior of a system. This is serious stuff that we're dealing with. I'm not going to say much more on this, except to say, if you want to see more of this, I have a whole other talk that's available on YouTube with these 25 different lessons that I've learned in the past 3 decades around the physical side of what we call cyber physical systems, so autonomous systems like AID. So not going to spend any time on this. If you want to learn more about what some of these challenges and opportunities are, just go watch this one. I'm going to pivot a little bit now to this concept of hacking and engineering. How do I reconcile those two things? And I guess the short answer would be I don't. They are quite different things. They're very valuable in their own rights. And it's, I'm not throwing any disparaging on either of them. Each have a place. So being a chemical engineer by background, I use this little metaphor here of hacking is sort of doing something for the first time. Let's mix 2 test tubes of stuff together. Oh, look, something novel happened. Isn't that cool? That other picture on the right-hand side is the first major chemical plant I worked in. This is the world's biggest ethylene plant in Red Deer, Alberta, Canada. They produce something like 6 billion pounds a year of ethylene. So this is the difference between hacking and engineering, is about scale, is about responsibility, is there's a completely different set of factors at play here. So as I was involved in the Nightscout hacking and that article that was written about me in Harvard Business Review, the author came back to me and said, Lane, what do you think about hacking now? And I said, well, I have to admit, I'm really nuanced about this. I've really changed my view of things because she thought I was just going to be hacking forever and disrupting. And I realized, there is a time and a place for everything. That if you're uncomfortable with the status quo of something and you want to get to new value, there's really 2 steps that you go through. One is you deliberately introduce variation. Let me try something new. Let me do something that's never been done before. So let me innovate and explore the possibilities. But once you've found something that works, then it's about removal of variation and just exploiting that, scaling that, making lots of it. So the first is mixing a bunch of novel test tubes together of stuff till you see something interesting, and then saying, okay, how am I going to go make 6 billion pounds of that a year? So I've been on both sides of this. And the real question is, when do you do that pivot? When do you do that design freeze? And then as you're going through those steps of hacking versus engineering, you're bringing fundamentally different practices into play. You might be hacking commercial projects. You might be cutting up a road bike, putting shocks on it to create a mountain bike. You might be sticking a sail on an existing surfboard to make a windsurfer. So it's basic crafting versus when you're trying to do things at scale, you're bringing on a completely different set of activities. So just choosing the right time and place for what you're doing. The other thing that I've come across or come to appreciate in the world of automated insulin delivery and medical devices is hardware is hard. Hardware is really, really difficult to get right. This is just a small list that I came up with of insulin pumps that, how would I put it, are not currently providing value to people with diabetes. They're not on the market yet. They were on the market, they're gone, they never made it to market. And I have companies like Medtronic here because yes, they do have some very successful systems, but there's also a bunch of them that you've never seen that the money, a great deal of money was spent on. And the same with CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, for the handful of Dexcom and Eversense and Abbott's that are out there. There's another couple dozen companies that have really, really struggled to do hardware. It is really hard to do. And each of these represent conservatively, $5 to $150 million of investment. So it's easily $500 million have been spent on things that have not yet seen the light of day. One way that engineers use to characterize maturity is this thing called a technology readiness level scale, a TRL. And this is another way of sort of showing the difference between hacking and engineering, where as you migrate up this scale towards full release of a commercial scalable system, the costs go up extensively. So something like 85% of the effort, 85% of the cost is expended going from TRL3 to TRL9. So just demonstrating that basic principle only gets you 15%, 10% of the way there. This is why it is so difficult. One of the reasons it's so difficult for these systems to come to play, to come to market. And not only is hardware traditionally hard, so for instance, pumps, just things like leachables, extractables, biocompatibility, delivery volume accuracy, just making a pump, that's hard enough historically. And CGMs, as we know, as we've gone through the Dexcom 7 and the G4 and the G5 and the G6 and the G7, accuracy and wear time, they're really hard to get right. And things like factory calibration, those are traditional challenges. These poor folks in hardware, and my hands are off to them, my hat is off to them, they've got new challenges as well. So these FDA special controls that you might have heard something about, which are essentially defining the interoperability standards for alternate control enabled pumps and interoperable CGMs, those are good and inevitable to have these standards. However, they also, if history repeats itself, which I expect it will, when you look at other industries that went through a similar set of standardization, it changed where innovation happens. It changed innovation from that level to the level one up, and it basically commoditized those base level technologies. In other words, when everything is now defined by a standard, have you met the standard or not? You can't differentiate by those attributes anymore, and anything that isn't differentiated by those attributes, by definition, is a commodity. Then you've also got FDA quite rightly interested in cybersecurity and reliability, so those are new things. There's ongoing desire to add features. This PMA indemnification is a little legal challenge that some of these companies have with respect to, if you're no longer doing a PMA, a pre-market approval for a class 3 medical device, you're now not protected from tort lawsuit. Whereas, so now with 510K class 2 devices, they will be exposed to that. And then another chilling scenario, at least with pumps, is as we're moving towards smartphone control and bolusing from the phone and interaction from the phone, which is fantastic, and I love it, it's shifting the center of gravity from the pump to the phone. Whereas now we're taking our pumps out 3 or 4 or 10 times a day to interact with them. In the very near future, they're going to be under our clothes for 3 or 4 or 7 days, and only filled with insulin or batteries charged. So they're out of sight, out of mind. And that's also going to be difficult and challenging for companies to maintain their differentiation. So it was really this fact that hardware is hard, and I'm good at software and algorithms that really helped me make the choice to start a pure software company, a pure automation company, and instead partner with these folks who've made the incredible lift to develop great pumps and CGMs. Another little area is engineering a closed loop system is not a single domain of engineering. It's not just control engineering. However, if you look at some of the academic work that's been done in research in universities, most of them are pure control engineers. They may not have any software engineering experience or automation human factors or modeling and simulation and so on. So even within the engineering domain of a closed loop system, you need to have at least some awareness of almost a dozen different sub branches and specialties of engineering. And it's hard to find those specific skills. And if you do find them, they're probably not working in the diabetes space, or they're under strict employment agreements. So it's a real challenge bringing a dream team together like this. The only two places I've ever seen that did this were Medtronic Diabetes and Bigfoot. And then even if you get all the engineering assembled, engineering is just the start. You have all of these other skills and experiences that are necessary to bring a scalable offering to people who need it. Regulatory experience, clinical experience, customer support, legal, finance, intellectual property, training. It really does take a village to succeed in this space. Okay, so I want to take a little pause here and do a State of the Union. Where are we with closed loop in 2021? There's a couple different vectors that closed loop have arrived on our doorstep. The traditional one, and I give full credit to Medtronic for starting earliest with this. Dr. Fran Kaufman, who was the chief medical officer there and is now at Eversense. I really give her credit for investing early, in Al Mann, I guess, as well, of putting the internal resources in place to be able to be the first to launch with an AID system, the 670G. And Bigfoot's the only other company I've ever seen do that. So that's one vector, is coming in as a commercial company with also hardware in mind. So in Bigfoot's case, it was the Asante pump. Another approach, which we are all very familiar with, is taking the incredible innovation from the DIY community, the We Are Not Waiting community, and using that as the basis for innovation, and then working with the amazing team at Tidepool to bring the necessary engineering, regulatory, and clinical data analysis to bear to file a 510K. So that's another path. But by and large, the majority of the AID systems that are likely to be seen come from academic algorithms. So this is just a small sampling of the $100 million, $150 million of investment that the JDRF made in this space with my friend Aaron Kowalski and Jeffrey Brewer. So they provided seed innovation in these universities, and I know most of the people there. I knew them before diabetes because they were working on fellow chemical engineering control things. And this has really been how things like the control IQ algorithm in Tandem, or the Horizon algorithm in Insulet coming soon. This is where those algorithms come from. And then there's a much smaller community out here, of which Nudge is a part of, commercial algorithm only companies. So saying we're not doing hardware, other people are good at hardware, we'll partner with them. And there's just a handful of those companies, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. So then you've got, and this is just a small representative sample of the hardware companies, the pump and the CGM companies. So just imagine everybody's talking to everybody else, pairing up, figuring out how do we serve the needs of the type 1 community, the insulin requiring community. So it's a complex picture, it's an evolving picture, it's an interesting picture. And this is where we're at today. We've essentially got 3rd generation hybrid closed loop systems available, depending where you are in the world, either the Medtronic Tandem or Diaboloop systems. You've also got the DIY communities systems, and then a couple on the horizon, no pun intended, from Insulet and Beta Bionics coming soon. But I would characterize all of these as follows, that they're very full-featured, very sophisticated, lots of configuration possibilities. They're using great components, good pump, good CGM, good algorithm, and they deeply engage the user, carb counting, bolusing, putting in lots of basal profiles, being able to configure and respond and monitor to your CGM. So that is how I would characterize the current state of the AID space. Boris Kovachev and his team did an amazing triple-armed study recently, which answered the question, where does AID provide most of the benefits? What time of day? And unsurprisingly, most of the benefits, almost all of the benefits of AID accrue overnight, not during the day. I think all of us know how wild and crazy days are. Just about every disturbance, and what did Adam Brown say? There's 42 different sources of variation in blood glucose. Almost all of them are positive disturbances. They make blood glucose go up. So meals, meeting stress, anaerobic exercise, and so on. All of these, most of these manifest over daylight, over daytime. So it's unsurprising that AID systems have such a challenge during the day, because they're being continuously assaulted by these positive disturbances. And it's only at night, when there's fewer disturbances, that they can really do their job and eat into this hyperglycemia. Okay. So moving on a little bit, and this is actually a slide that I first presented at a JDRF event 10 years ago, based on our family's experience with diabetes. That we call this the iron triangle in project management: scope, schedule, cost, pick two. Like you don't get everything. So I co-opted this concept of a triangle and assert that with intensive management of type 1 diabetes and use of insulin, there's a choice: safety, lifestyle flexibility, and therapy burden. The current systems do not provide a capability to achieve all three of those simultaneously. So if we look at our own family's journey with diabetes, this was when Hayden was young and cute and quite content to let us manage his diabetes for him. Lisa and I chose safety and letting him get on with being a kid and having a flexible life as paramount. So we didn't want any chronic or acute complications. We wanted him to be able to eat whatever he wanted, exercise, not be embarrassed in social situations. So we took a hit on therapy burden, right? So we were carb counting to the gram, we were bolusing, we were pre-meal planning, we had alarms going off. We were so motivated, we built Nightscout. So we took the hit and basically didn't sleep for a long time. So then Hayden grows up and goes through that wonderful thing called puberty. And turns out he had a different idea on the priority of these things. He really liked that life flexibility, so he preserved that. He ate what he wanted and did what he wanted and didn't want to be embarrassed by a CGM alarm, so he just stopped wearing a CGM at some point. Didn't want to be embarrassed by whipping a pump out in high school cafeteria at lunchtime, so he just stopped bolusing. So he had a pretty easy ride from a therapy burden perspective because he said, I'm just not going to burden myself with that. But that had a countervailing effect on safety, unfortunately. The picture in the upper left-hand corner is Lisa giving him an IV at home because of DKA to avoid a $50,000 trip to the hospital. So there's us hacking an available bag of saline to keep him out of hospital. But it just shows the challenge that we faced at that time. And I think that there's a lot of people go through this. If you look at the statistics, whether it's from the T1D exchange, as this data is, or other sources, this young adult period is very, very difficult. People are going through all sorts of changes in their lives, all sorts of stresses, all sorts of new experiences. So we really caught Hayden on both sides of this bump, where many people are challenged in their management. And what it basically comes down to is a choice to say, I choose, it's not my choice to be engaged with diabetes right now. There's other things in my life that are more important. And I respect that. So many of the people that I've met in the diabetes community over the last 10 years say the same thing. It's like, oh, my teenage years were a train wreck. So his endocrinologist is Dr. Ann Peters at USC, just amazing. And she's got a saying, keep them alive till they're 25. So that became our mantra of, we'll just do what we can, and he'll grow a prefrontal cortex and develop some executive function, and we'll be good to go. But there's some data from Tidepool here on their website that I think points to a different challenge here with engagement, where these are cohorts of different ages, different age brackets, where they're looking at, and how long since diagnosis. Are these newly diagnosed 0 to 7-year-olds, or they had it for 1 to 5 years? And what you can see in time and range is a consistent backsliding in time and range as duration of diabetes goes on, which to me means it's hard. It's hard to maintain that level of engagement over time. We certainly saw this with our approach to carb counting. Initially, it was get the scale out and figure out what percentage of carbohydrates the carrots are and the potatoes are, and add them all up. And so we went from that to, well, I'll just bolus for 40 grams and eat till I think I've eaten 40 grams, to, well, I'll just bolus for 10 units. So it's difficult to do that math and to maintain that level of engagement over time, is my belief. There's some data from Seagrove Partners, which I think the community would agree that managing blood glucose is a tough challenge. It's an unrelenting 24/7 responsibility, and postprandial management is the hardest thing, at least according to 681 people in this survey. So thinking about bolusing and meal times, I became very fixated on this with over the last couple of years, and kind of like a David Letterman top 10 list of why bolusing is hard or difficult. What is it? William Churchill had this saying that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the alternatives. So I co-opted that a bit to say bolusing is the worst form of intensive insulin management except for all the alternatives. So in the absence of any alternative, we have to go with it, but it is hard. It is hard to do. It's dangerous to do. It's only partially effective. The Cosmo pump got killed because of patent infringement on a bolus calculator. There's legal minefields. There's just so many challenges with bolusing. And this is something that I started to say when I was at Medtronic, when we were so preoccupied with delivery volume accuracy and making very precise delivery of insulin in our insulin pumps, is that insulin pumps precisely deliver inaccurate amounts of insulin. Oops, sorry about the spelling there. So if you look at the inputs to a bolus calculation, your current glucose value, it's going to have some inaccuracy, some MARD. You're going to have your carb counting, your carb guessing. You or your doctor will have put in the insulin sensitivity factor and the carb ratio, which could be off, probably are off. You might have hacked your insulin on board, insulin action time to create a more aggressive controller. So that might be a little bit off. So if you do this, and by the way, that was my second equation, so there's no more equations. If you do sort of a tolerance stack up of the contributors to inaccuracy, the thing that at the time Medtronic was fixated on, pump delivery error, turns out to have almost no effect on blood glucose. Like, who cares? But carb counting error has a huge effect. And the amount of carbs you eat has a huge effect. So you look at a teenage boy who's not carb counting very accurately and having huge meals because he's hungry and growing, that's going to contribute in a huge way to bolus error. Another thing which just blew me away when I sat down and did the math of it is bolusing is dangerous. If you are taking essentially a sixth of your total daily dose every day, so if you've got a 50-50 basal split and you're having 3 equal sized meals, you're taking about a sixth of your total insulin at breakfast, at lunch, and at dinner. That has a nominal glucose lowering effect of about 180 milligrams per deciliter. So every time you have a meal bolus, if you don't eat, your blood glucose will go down by 180. So you're basically eating yourself out of a disaster 3 times a day, which is pretty dangerous. And that's if you remember to eat and if you remember to bolus, which also has its own challenges, right? It's quite common for people to bolus. Well, it's very common to eat but forget to bolus, and a little less common to bolus but forget to eat. But if you just take one of those great big boluses and then forget to eat, so that actually happened to Hayden a couple of years ago, where he was in a rush, he bolused some huge amount, and he was going to stop on his way to work to get some fast food and forgot. And we got a call. I got a call from an unfamiliar number, and I, for whatever reason, picked it up. I normally let these spam go right to voicemail. And it was his boss saying, Hayden's on the floor and he's not talking, and he's not doing what I asked him to do. Is there something wrong? And he said, yeah, there's probably something wrong. And so we rushed and filled him over with juice boxes, and it was just like a flower coming back to life. But bolusing but forgetting to eat is a pretty dangerous thing. So I would say that's one of the big burdens of current management of diabetes. The other thing is CGMs, wonderful as they are, keep people very engaged, whether they want to be or not. This is a distribution from some data that Dexcom presented of just how many times a day are people interacting with their CGM. And the average person is around 10, but there's some people, and I'm probably heavily weighted on the call today, who are checking 30, 50 times a day. And then there's people like my son who are checking 0 times a day. So this is, I call it chasing the number or being chased by the number. And this is something we learned in oil refinery alarm systems, is that an alarm is a negative reinforcement. You screwed up again, right? So, you're not living to that ideal of a perfect person because you let the thing get out of boundaries, and now we're going to let the world know that you've screwed up. So difficult, so nasty. So I just am blown away by what Abbott did, right? They said, we'll let people choose their level of engagement. Rather than being chased by the number, they can choose when they measure. And now, well, we know just how successful they've been. There's something like 3 billion sensors. I forget, like they've done an incredible job helping to reach a less engaged population through the fact that it doesn't have alarms. So back to this iron triangle, I'm going to reduce the dimensions to just 2 and look at therapy burden versus glycemic outcomes, where I think the cohort that are on the call tonight, and I would certainly be in the same cohort if I had diabetes myself, I would be putting lots of work into it, and I'd be going for the best glycemic outcomes, the highest time in range. So I would be in the upper right-hand corner along with all the rest of you. My son is not like that. He's in that lower left-hand corner where diabetes isn't the biggest priority in his life. And I get it, and I appreciate it, and I understand. And as we saw from some of these early trials of AID systems like the 670G, there's a lot of people came to that same conclusion of I can't sustain that level of effort. And some staggering attrition happened over the course of 12 months from people who started out with use of this system extensively and then they stopped using it. Again, because of some of these things like carb counting and the alarm systems, and just it was turning out to be more of a nag than they were willing to accept. So I think this plot here is drawn a bit the wrong way. I think it looks more like this, that there's a lot of people out there who have different priorities. They have a young family, they've got a stressful job, they've got an active social life, where diabetes isn't their priority. They're not wearing it on their sleeve. They're not showing up on Sunday night to listen to a boring guy talk for 2 hours. They have other priorities. And so this is really where I'm focused with Nudge right now, is how do I help those people who have made a choice to, which I completely respect, of balancing therapy burden and glycemic outcomes, because there's really no solution for them right now. There's no way for them to take advantage of AID technology with that balance. And more data on why attrition happens, too many alarms and alerts, embarrassment. They just don't want to. I don't want more. I don't want to be looking at diabetes all the time. And what frustrates me a little bit is the research community. If you look at the diabetes journals, so this just came out. This is a week old from my friend Roman Havorka, new closed loop insulin delivery systems. So he's got this wonderful table 2, showing all the new things that are coming. There is no column for therapy burden. All they're measuring are glycemic outcomes. So my frustration is we're not even bringing that into the discussion of what is the burden to achieve those outcomes. There's no trade-off right now. It's almost like if you only give one measure, then everybody's going to be trying to maximize that measure. I got 82% time in range. Oh, I got 95% time in range. Well, I had to carb count to the gram, and I had to pre-meal bolus, and I had to get 50 alarms a day, but I got that high time in range. So I think there's some positive progress in this area with some of the work that Kath Barnard Kelly and Corey Hood, Lori Laffel are doing around the Inspire metrics, the Inspire survey, where now every closed loop trial, there's an expectation that this survey be done and asking people, are you getting what you expected, what you want? But there's still some challenges here. So when we're talking about therapy burden, what do we actually mean? Like, drill into that a little bit. There's the obvious things, the physical burden, which I won't even talk about. I'm more about the cognitive burden and the emotional burden. So some of the things on the left-hand side, what are the burdens for the person with diabetes? Obviously, the alarms and notifications. But one of the things we discovered when we were doing the sort of cognitive task analysis for these chemical plants is it's not the procedural tasks that are hard. It's the thinking tasks. It's the troubleshooting. It's the detection of the novel. It's the maintaining of situational awareness. So how do you get inside somebody's head to measure what they're thinking? Because it's not about a procedure of a bolus calculation per se. So I think we're still very immature in our ability to even measure therapy burden. And then you've also got the challenge that our poor healthcare professionals who are so overworked already, they have similar challenges of, okay, I'm only getting reimbursed for 15 minutes for this visit, and I have to assimilate all of this data. I have to pretend to be a control engineer for 15 minutes and put in all these basal profiles and carb ratios and everything, and then I'm not going to see the person for another 4 months. And there's a lot of different places to configure. So this is a little benchmark that we did, that there's something like 1,500 configurable settings in the 600 series pump. So if you chose to, you could go in and manipulate 1,600 things. So you think about what that does to the proclivity of a primary care provider in Tennessee, in rural Tennessee, to prescribe one of these systems. There's no way that's going to happen, because he's just opening himself or herself up to liability and risk and complexity. So I think that burden manifests primarily for the person with diabetes, but also for their healthcare professionals. So I look forward to the day where we can actually compare and contrast therapies and look at multiple dimensions of them, not just their glycemic outcomes, but their burdens, and to say, well, boy, if I could achieve comparable outcomes with no burden, with no interaction, maybe there will be times in my life, phases in what I'm going through, that's okay. And that's what I want. I would give up a little bit so that I don't have to think about it as much. So I look forward to the day when we develop as a community a set of measures for us to be able to choose. One challenge that I'm running into right now, and this meeting tonight is actually a case in point of this, is it's difficult to characterize the broader T1D population's unmet needs. And part of the reason for that is they're pretty quiet about things, the majority folks. So here's an example from Facebook of somebody who, every time she thought about some aspect of her diabetes that day, she put a little hash mark on her hand. So added about, she thought about diabetes 250 times a day. Which is great. And that's probably how much all of you are thinking about it and how much I think about it. But my son, he thinks about it 0 times a day, or maybe 4 times a day. And so you might all recall or have seen the news a few years ago about scientists announcing with great excitement, looking up at the cosmos, that they've discovered this thing called dark matter, that in fact, 85% of the known universe is made up of stuff we just discovered, that everything you thought about the universe was wrong, and in fact it's full of a bunch of stuff that we didn't know till now. So what I worry about is what happens if diabetes is like that? What happens if we only are currently paying attention to the light matter, to the people who are counting the number of times they interacted with diabetes, or starting companies like Bigfoot or Tide Pool, or being in groups like this tonight. So don't get me wrong, very powerful, very good source of information, but is that light actually obscuring a deeper unmet need? And so I'll be honest, for about the last year, I've been looking for dark matter. I've been looking for it, and it's really hard to find. I think I have some proxies for it, but even things like the T1D Exchange Clinical Registry, that's not dark matter. That's people who are going to the top endo clinics and spending time going through a 10-page registry intake assessment and being tracked. So there are some proxies for it. This is a clinical exchange in Canada, which again is still not quite dark matter, but it's really showing what's going on for the people who are currently benefiting from hybrid closed loop systems, or who would benefit from hybrid closed loop systems. Inbound A1Cs in the 6s and 7s, maybe low 8s, and then they're interacting with their diabetes regularly, giving lots of boluses or checking their blood glucose frequently. So I'm more worried about what's going on in the other half of the distribution, the people who are north of 8 of an A1C. Where are they? Where are their needs? So brings me to my next challenge of how do we find those less engaged users, and how do we design for them? Because it'd be nice to make the argument, well, come on, just get more engaged. But I think that's kind of a cop-out and unrealistic and unfair. So how do we design for them? And it's hard to find them, as I mentioned earlier, because these lead users, these embedded lead users, like I mentioned before, even getting into clinical trials, there's recruitment bias, right? Hayden's been in 3 clinical trials because we made him aware of them and we were watching for them. So you get challenges with recruiting and selection bias. This baseline demographics from the Loop observational study, the attributes that I have circled here, these aren't your average people with diabetes. So I worry that we're a little bit swayed by what we're seeing here. And the challenge is if we are designing for this early market, the early adopters, the very engaged, are we in jeopardy of running into what Jeffrey Moore calls the chasm? And how do we cross the chasm and serve the mainstream market? And again, as I said at the beginning, I probably have more questions than answers for you tonight. I don't know the answer to this one. Okay, so shifting a little bit to more a technical aspect of things, because we have heard so much from others about interoperability and how wonderful that is and how that's going to change everything. Well, I was working for Honeywell, the world's biggest provider of industrial automation systems, when interoperability came to that world. And it was kind of like Pandora's box. All the customers were clamoring for it. You need to make everything interoperable. You need to have standards. And once it happened, they were almost like, we're sorry we said that. Could you go back to the way you were? Because this has created a whole bunch of challenges for us, and we had no idea. So my friend Joe Cafazzo at University Health Network in Toronto, who's been a real pioneer of interoperability in the DICOM space for imaging interoperability, and has done a ton of the work on interoperability in the AID space. He said, Lane, what's happening in the diabetes space is not interoperability, it's compatibility. It's one-to-one compatibility with technical or commercial agreements between pairs of companies, between a CGM company and a pump company, between an algorithm company and a pump company, and so on. And so I think we've got a long way to go with interoperability. And I was reflecting recently that what happened in my old domain is a whole series of standard interoperability foundations, not a whole bunch of them, but a handful of them, were born out of this interoperability challenge, like the OPC Foundation. OLE stands for, what does it stand for now? Open Process Control. And the Open Process Automation Forum. So my point is, these are 20-year-old foundations with very effective governance that have risen to the occasion and are providing an interoperable testing and certification process. There's nothing like that in our world yet. I'm hopeful there will be. Another challenge or opportunity is there are no, and I'm going to use some geeky terms here, verified and validated computer modeling and simulation medical device development tools. So there's no V&V CMNSs that are MDDTs. So what that means is that what simulations we have never been properly qualified for use in medical device development. So it's kind of like you've got a tool and there's no way to certify that tool actually works. So this is a huge opportunity. And this is why now I've been at 3 companies. At Medtronic, we built our own simulator. At Bigfoot, we built our own simulator. And now at Nudge, I built my own simulator because of this. And I'm getting tired of building simulators, right? Why am I building the same simulator 3 times over? How much faster could the community go if we used a common version of the truth for simulation? And why am I talking about simulation? Why do we care about that? And this is my friend Tina Morrison from the FDA Office of Science and Engineering Labs, who now runs innovation for the FDA. This is a slide I used from her with permission. In the future, they're saying that an increasing amount of evidence will be generated not from clinical trials, but from in silico evidence or computer modeling and simulation. So she actually wrote the standard for how do you do verification and validation of a computer simulation of a medical device tool. And then the FDA has this wonderful pathway for certifying those tools. So again, an unmet need, but hopefully the path is clear and somebody will rise to the occasion. Almost done here, and I think we're going to have plenty of time for questions. Yet another challenge. evidentiary requirements. What evidence do you need that an AID system is safe and effective? So I thought I would use as a metaphor powered flight. So if you look at 1903 and the Wright brothers, the question at that time was, is it possible? Can we even do powered flight? And now 2020, the real question is, are incremental changes safe and effective? Oh, we'll just make a little change to the Boeing 737. We'll just put a slightly bigger engine on it and add a little bit of software. What could go wrong? Well, I think we all know what could go wrong with the 737 MAX and the MCAS and whatever that tragedy cost in number of lives lost and billions of dollars from Boeing's balance sheet. So the question of are incremental changes safe and effective is a very difficult one. So if you rewind the tape a little bit to automated insulin delivery, 10 years ago, the question was, is it possible? There were no AID systems out there. So JDRF and FDA got together and wrote this wonderful guidance document, the content of IDE, investigational device exemptions, and PMA, pre-market approvals for artificial pancreas device systems. Here's the thing you need to do if you want to bring one of these things to market, which is the pathway that every commercial system I'm aware of has gone through. But I think we're at a different place now. There's no longer a question of whether these things work. They all work. They are all better than open loop systems. So the real question, I think, is similar to the one that the FDA faces right now: is, are incremental changes safe and effective? The part of the reason why this question is a difficult one to answer, if you go back to that example I had of the plus equals versus the equal sign, the magnitude of a change, stated the other way, with respect to modification of algorithms, the evidentiary requirements do not depend on the magnitude of change. In other words, one small change could have a huge effect, and in a different area, a big change might have no effect. So you can't, by inspection, determine the level of evidence required. So there's a huge challenge out there with respect to evidentiary requirements. So for instance, let's say Tandem wants to do Control IQ version 1.5 or 2.0, and they'll say, oh, we're just making a little change to the software. Well, what does little mean? So I hope you see my point that there's opportunity here to up the game. And I don't exactly know how to do this because it's not like we can look to other regulators as shining examples of how to do this. This is something called the V model in system engineering, where up the upper left-hand corner of the V are the customer needs and the high-level requirements, and then you decompose those into lower and lower requirements. And then as you're going back up the other side of the V, you should be testing your component requirements versus your component tests and your units versus your unit tests and so far. The FAA gets involved very early. They're basically prescribing everything about the development process of a commercial airliner. In exact opposite contrast, the NHTSA, who regulates vehicles, they basically wait till a bunch of Teslas have done a bunch of bad things before they get around to saying, yeah, maybe we should do something about that. And the FDA is somewhere in the middle. But the point is that this is a challenging area for every one of these autonomous systems, whether it's commercial aviation, autonomous vehicles, or automated insulin delivery. Okay, this is something that Ben West pointed out to me, that very soon there's no longer going to be access to CGMs and insulin pumps without a development or commercial agreement in place. So our wonderful Riley links, where's my Riley link? Our wonderful Riley links are soon going to be not very useful because the FDA is working very hard with manufacturers to close access to those. Again, I can't do anything about it. I don't know what to do about that, but to me, it's really sad. And I was talking with Rehan Lal about this the other night. that it's kind of like a pipeline where you're protecting everything in that CGM pipeline, from the sensor to the transmitter to the receiver or the phone, putting lots of security in every step of the way, and then it's just gushing onto the ground, gushing out to the user's screen for them to see. So I think it's interesting that so much protection would be going into CGMs when at the end of the day, it's just going to be presented to a user. So that's a challenge. And then this one is perhaps the most disheartening to me in my position as the CEO of a startup, that there is no way to make money at this. There is no viable pathway for closed loop commercialization. And to me, this is one of the really sad parts of all of the work that the FDA has done on developing these interoperability standards, these special controls, is it takes three to tango, right? You need a sensor, you need a CGM, you need an algorithm, and you need a pump. If you don't have the algorithm, then you're not achieving the vision of an interoperable ecosystem. And right now, there is no pathway to make money doing what I'm doing. Sometimes I wonder why I'm doing it. But if you look at the current development costs, a clinical trial, a pivotal trial is $5 to $10 million. The development, I'm probably underwhelming that given the experience at Bigfoot. These are millions of dollars and years to do using the current level of evidence. Then if you look at what the cost of goods sold is for an insulin pump or the gross margin, they're not going to be giving up their margin. They're already under cost pressure and competitive commoditization pressures. So they're not going to give up any of their margin for your algorithm. And then there was some data from Seagrove Partners last year asking payers, the Blue Shields of the world, what their willingness to pay for a software algorithm would be. And it's something like $200 per person per year. So you do the math, and it's really hard to make any money when the costs are that high and the reimbursement is that low. So I guess in summary, again, I have more questions than answers. We've got this group of challenges about how do we make embedded lead users more effective and representative and contributing in these medical device companies. When do we transition from hacking to engineering? How do we achieve a balance and allow people to choose their level of engagement and balancing safety, lifestyle, and burden? How do we find this dark matter if it indeed exists? And how do we go design for them, because their needs might be quite different? How do we get over some of these infancy challenges with interoperability and certification? Fortunately, there's examples for doing that. And fortunately, there's examples for every one of these of how other domains have solved this. Computer modeling and simulation. You would never, in fact, a story I heard was the first time a commercial pilot ever flies an airplane is with paying passengers on board. They do all of their certification in the simulator. And the same thing with building a chemical plant. You would simulate everything before you welded a single piece of steel. And then the evidentiary requirements. So what is going to be necessary in the future as we get into these incremental changes to AID systems? And then again, I don't have any answers to the last two about what are we going to do about access to CGMs and pumps, and how do you create a market? How do you create an environment where companies like Nudge, assuming you want them to exist, can exist? I don't know the answer. So just a few more slides on Nudge itself, and then I will get into some Q&A hopefully. So what is Nudge? What is the goal of Nudge? The goal of Nudge is to provide the benefits of AID technology for a cohort of people yet to be confirmed that they exist, which I fondly refer to as dark matter, for whom diabetes isn't their biggest priority. I would assert that it's actually the majority of people with insulin requiring diabetes, at least at some point in their life. And unfortunately, they're the ones who are having the most difficulties, right? The most chronic and acute challenges, showing up in hospital with DKA or waking up feeling crappy every morning. How do we help those people lead a happier and safer life. So my vision of a full closed loop AID system like Nudge is that it doesn't require, you can do it, but you don't need to exchange physiological or behavioral information. So no mandatory meal boluses, no mandatory glucose information, no chasing or being chased by the number. You can if you want, you can look at it if you want, but you don't need to. And then for the doctors, because there's always ongoing changes in behavior and physiology, automatic adjustment of physiologic parameters, things like basal rates or carb ratios. So it's really about the easy button, how you make this easy for people with diabetes, easy for all healthcare providers, not just top endos like Ann Peters, easier for regulators because it's maybe simpler and more transparent to see, and easy for payers because it's providing outcomes for the people who are most challenging their systems. So I look at Nudge as less like a hybrid closed loop system and more like a Trulicity, more like a GLP-1 agonist or an SGLT2 inhibitor. It's a glucose responsive insulin delivery system in the same sense that those drugs are glucose responsive drugs. And in that respect, I discovered this new word a year ago called an adjuvant therapy. So an adjuvant therapy is a therapy given alongside the primary therapy that makes it work better. A friend of mine went through multiple myeloma cancer treatment a couple of years ago, and there was the chemo drug, but then there were adjuvants to that, like dexamethasone, that made it work better. That's what Nudge is. Nudge modifies sensor augmented pump therapy, SAP therapy, by interacting with an iCGM and an ACE pump to just nudge blood glucose. It's not trying to swing it out of the park and do amazing things. It's not like a Tesla trying to drive in a very precise sports car-like way. This is more like the minivan of automated insulin delivery. Really with the goal of making mealtimes easier, fewer notifications, fewer embarrassments, and then easy to set up and prescribe and adapt to your lifestyle as your lifestyle inevitably changes. The other thing is there's encouraging things happening in parallel, which back to the comment I made about Churchill and democracy being the worst form of government except for all the alternatives, or bolusing being the worst form of insulin management except for all the alternatives. Well, we're getting faster insulins. We're getting the ultra rapid insulins from Lilly and Novo, and who knows if we can get cone snail venom insulin working, that'll be even better. Inhalable insulin. All of these will help Nudge. All of these will help. And I was so happy to see this post by Tim Street yesterday or 2 days ago of eating half a pizza and using Lumjev and on full closed loop. So there are examples of this happening. I don't think I'm talking about science fiction in this ability to do to use full closed loop. So in summary, and I hope you have your questions ready, I believe there remains a large unmet need in a cohort that would really benefit from it. There's still plenty of challenges in this ecosystem. It's a pretty broken ecosystem, but challenges similar to this have been overcome before. If you've heard me speak before, you've heard me quote William Gibson, "The future's already here, it just hasn't been evenly distributed yet." So we just need to do a little more about that future distributing. And fully automated insulin delivery works. Full closed loop works. So here's a fairly recent picture of my son Hayden. In April last year, we convinced him to start wearing a Dexcom, start wearing a CGM again, start monitoring his blood glucose, got him onto a Control-IQ pump. And in 10 weeks, his A1C went from 12.1 to 7.6. And we said, please don't bolus, just let it do its thing. We hacked it. We set it up in Sleeping Beauty mode. And the most remarkable thing is he's still wearing it. He loves it. And it has made a huge difference in his life. So he's our little N of one experience of full closed loop providing benefits. So with that, I'd like to thank you and hope that you have some questions or comments for me.
You betcha. I had my camera off for most of it, and I found myself like a parrot bouncing my head through your entire talk, and I'm watching some of the personal chats going, this is it. This is it. This is exactly the problem. And you hit on so much. So I'm gonna turn this over. Here's what we're gonna do. There are a bunch of questions that have come out before the talk, and Cassidy is gonna kind of share those with you, and then if we have enough time, we'll allow people to raise their hands and interact directly with you, or you can ask them questions as well. I did have one quick question because I actually loved my trial on LoopAndLearn, but the stuff burns like the dickens and causes irritation. Are you aware of anything that's making that change? I did report it because I was hoping that they would put pressure on to modify that in some way, and then I was yelled at by someone in a forum saying, well, don't take that away from the rest of us. So are you aware of any of that?
I am not. So unfortunately, I have no direct experience, and Hayden used
Fiasp
for a little bit, but no, I don't have any direct experience. Sorry.
It's amazing. It is amazing.
It's mankind, right? Mankind, Afreeza was amazing. It was like a sports car compared to a truck of insulin, and it just. So just imagine a prandial dose of insulin from Afreeza, and then I look at Nudge as kind of like. If you're a fighter pilot, your wingman is like watching your six. It's like, you go do your life, you just take a little bit of insulin, and I got your six. I'm watching what's going on. If you're under bolused or over bolused, I'll get you. I think there's a huge complementary role for Afreeza in some of these full closed loop systems.
We had Dave Cassagna come and talk with us, and the buzz was quite significant. There's a fear of it, but it does work. It's amazing. Okay, Cass, it's you. Go.
If I can just take the moment to give a shout out now that I am also a Ventura Peep to both Afreeza and Nudge, because now we're dealing with the Ventura County people.
Excellent. Yeah.
I feel like, one, Lane, thank you, because similar to Joanne, I was just like sitting here snapping the whole time because you just touched on a lot of items that she and I have been talking about for what seems like years that are really important. And I feel like we had kind of gotten a bunch of questions together before, and honestly going through them, I feel like many of them don't necessarily apply because they're product based, like very specific, because we want to know people's algorithms. We want those details. We always get asked them, which don't seem necessarily applicable for this moment. The one thing that came top of mind to me in talking about the difficulty of interoperability, and I remember touring Bigfoot in 2018 and asking, I think Melissa Lee then, how, and I still have no clarity on this, even with like Tranglea of Omnipod or of Insulet. With interoperability, how are we going to get our prescriptions in the actual interoperable format, right? Especially with Nudge as a software-based part of that prescription format, right?
Yeah.
What does that actually look like? What do you frame that as looking like?
That's such a great question, Cass. And I'll answer the question with a different question that my wife asked as I was describing what Roche is doing right now, because they want to be the Switzerland of AID algorithms. They partnered with a number of companies for their solo pump to be interoperable in a wonderful way. I think they're very progressive. But my wife's question was, how's that going to work? Like, would you swap between algorithms? If it's so easy to interoperate, and how's your doctor going to support that? That's what I mean by these standards of open to Pandora's box. There's all these unintended consequences from them. And I think we're just now starting to see, and actually I spoke at the Bay Area Diabetes Symposium 2 years ago, and listened to Rehan Lal and Bruce Buckingham talk about all the AID systems coming. And there was a wonderful woman in the back corner, CDE, and one of the specialists in one of these clinics, and she put up her hand and said, the Tandem system has these features and the 670 has these features. People are going to be coming to me asking how to set these things up. You're putting a huge burden on me for this. And that's when the light went off for me. Is like, I think just a simple no configuration only system is going to relieve her burden. So there were a series of events like this, which really brought me to where I am today. So I'm sorry, I don't have a direct answer to your question, but I think these will be answered, and they're going to have to be answered.
Well, it's a really, I mean, even just bringing up the healthcare provider perspective on this is, again, this is a big, giant topic that we ask everyone, every device manufacturer that comes on here is, how are you going to train your healthcare providers when we, the active T1D humans of Loop World, like, we have to train each other constantly on how to adjust our settings. And it's so hard to imagine doing that for a healthcare provider for so many of the plethora of AID systems that are here and or coming in a way that is easy for them and that they will actually buy into, because you know that they're not going to, right? And the thing we've been really surprised to hear is that the systems will be so easy, they won't need to train healthcare providers. They won't need to make the investment to like really sit down and think critically about how they train them, which obviously is a setup for failure.
I was just going to say, if you have a chance to watch that other video I made reference to where I gave the keynote, one of the principles I talk about there is this concept of hierarchical, temporally decoupled feedback control. And what that means in plain English is you have fast loops at the bottom and then slower loops at the top. It's almost like the way an organization should work, that you don't want the president coming and micromanaging you. Like everything goes through a hierarchy, and the higher you are in the hierarchy, the slower the loop should be. They should be setting policy or general strategic direction, and you're worried about what you're doing on your day-to-day basis. So all of the AID focus, probably for the past 10 years, has been on the lowest loop, right? The 5-minute CGM value, sense, decide, act. There's another loop above that, which we're just now starting to talk about, which is this physiology individualization. How do we adapt this over time? Right now, it's being done by healthcare providers. If you're lucky enough to have a healthcare provider, if you're lucky enough to get in every 3 months, there's nothing magic about 3 months, right? That is a completely arbitrary, some people need adjustment every week. Some people probably don't need it every year. So we have this sort of broken, expensive feedback loop on top of the current loop. And if you look at control theory, that will get automated as well. Bigfoot had some patents in this area called physiology individualization. If you look at some of the researchers, that's what they're working on now. They're not working on the low loop. They're looking at the adaptive control loop one above it.
We've been actually talking a lot about who's going to look at the data. There's so much data, and no human being can take all of that's coming in for more than one human being at a time. And then who's going to provide the feedback on a timely basis?
Absolutely. It's just not going to happen. Like, they're not going to get reimbursed for it. So I was a big fan of this clinician decision support. And, there's a whole bunch of companies representing to do that. I really believe those are going to get replaced by computers, that this is a job that a computer can do quite effectively, especially in combination with the closed loop at the bottom.
I think it's the only way it can happen. It has to be programmed by, we have someone in our group, Kenny Fox, who looks at a lot of people's data and really sees it and understands the algorithm, is able to help people. And his knowledge has to go into an expert system, then can just churn it out. And then the delivery of it is another issue.
So I have a quick little story about that. I worked with a guy at Honeywell whose name was Stan Grable, and he was really good at refinery maintenance practices. So he would go from one refinery to another and fix up the maintenance. And one day, one of my colleagues said, "Stan, you're great, but you don't scale. We need to put Stan in a can." So if we could can Stan's knowledge. So I was telling this to Fran Kaufman one day at Medtronic, and then it occurred to me that Fran rhymes with Stan. I said, we need to put Fran in a can. We need to take an expert clinician that you are, one of the top endos in the world, and figure out how to make CareLink into you with decision support. And I think I was just thinking too small at the time. We need to take it one step further than that and fully automate it.
I totally agree with you. I have one question, but if any of you have questions, just you go into the participant screen and you're able to raise your hand, and then Cass can kind of ask you to unmute. And I totally forgot what my question was, so it doesn't really matter. If you have any specific questions for Lane, you know, feel free to just kind of unmute, ask the question, and we'll see where this goes. And I'm going to give it back to you, Lane. Do you have anything that you want to ask us specifically?
Well, as you know, one of my big challenges is this hypothesis that dark matter exists, and I would love to understand from you whether any of that resonated. Because my experience with diabetes is one step removed, so I would love to hear.
I think
there's definitely, this is like a hot topic. And I think that Carol just commented in the chat something that I think as a formerly dark matter T1D, really identified in my like active in T1D life now, which is what she just says. It seems like the engaged users, AKA we, the do-it-yourself community, are going to get left behind by commercial systems, and we're going to lose our access to our pumps and our CGMs, right? When you talk about how do you design for the dark matter T1Ds, Joanne said earlier, well, why don't you just design for us? Like, hey, we're really active and like we want the best thing. Why don't you just design for us, but make it way less burdensome than it is right now? Because we don't want the burden of what it is right now either.
Well, so that's
hard. I mean, you know, we are thinking, and what we've seen what's happening in France, we are afraid that we are going to get cut out, right? Lose the magic that have had access to and like been a part of for these last few years.
So a few of the books on my bookshelf back there by Clayton Christensen, and he talks about the innovator's dilemma and how if you don't serve the needs of those, or if you're over-serving the majority's needs, then you're subject to disruption. And but the great thing about serving those people's needs is it's about simplicity, right? And everybody can absorb simplicity. Not everybody can absorb complexity. So I really do believe if you're not the simplest solution, you're the target of one. Somebody else is going to come up with something simpler. So that's the way I would answer your question, Cass, is that yes, I'm optimistic that by serving the needs of people like my son, it will allow everybody to benefit as well. Because I didn't say you don't bolus, you can't bolus, you can choose whether to bolus. It's really about providing a choice.
Do you have any sense of if we do choose to bolus because we're kind of compulsively doing what we do and we like our 95% in range, can't, in a system like NudgeBG, could one achieve something better than 60% or 70% in range?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it'll be comparable to any hybrid closed loop system at that point.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we've been asking that, going, I don't want to give up, but I want to give up the burden. I think we're real tired. I said to one person in our group, could you just take over for me for a day? Just do it for me for the day. And I understand the system. I understand how it works. Okay, I'm going to see if we have any hands raised. You know, Ben has been on here and commenting all along, and he rejects the proposition that it's a dark matter versus engaged users suggestion. I actually don't, because I think the most terrifying group is the teenagers coming into adulthood. They're the most at risk. It's treacherous. So I do believe it exists, and I believe it exists even in the DIY community. We just work against that. But I know a lot of us are tired. You know, it's a lot to do. We're thrilled that we can do it, but we're tired. And if you reduce the burden, I guess that's the buzzword now, is reduce that burden for whatever level you're working at. So, but we want you to aim at us. Okay, so anybody else have a question? Glenn, Carol, anybody want to jump in?
I do have a question, but I can't figure out how to raise my hand. I know I figured it out earlier. So oh, geez, Louise. My question was about, what happens to people who are engaged users? I guess we could bolus on a system like yours. Have you tested it specifically? Have you tested it out? I know you've had hundreds of thousands of hours. Have you tested it out on loopers and other people already on closed loop systems?
So this is where the short answer is no. The longer answer is one of the advantages I have is that I call it putting my fish hook in a bunch of different ponds. So one of the things I'm super interested to see is what happens with Tide Pool and the filing of their 510K for Loop, because I think there's an opportunity to change the way that these things are regulated, and Tide Pool is blazing a very brave path. And when and if they're successful, their public commitment is to help others do that. And I absolutely believe Howard and Brandon, who are good friends of mine, when they say, everybody wants to should be benefiting from Tide Pool's work, and I agree. So the short answer is no. This hasn't been on any humans. It's been on hundreds of thousands of simulated humans. But I'm watching closely what happens with some of these other things, because again, a $10 million clinical trial is a pretty steep price these days.
Okay, I see a hand up. Nina, I just sent you a unmute. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thank you. So my question is fairly simple. My big issue with these systems like the Horizon, or as it's now Omnipod 5 and the Control IQ, is that their correction range is way too high for me. And I'm achieving such great results with Loop and staying in 95% between 70 and 140. And it's just, I'm just so upset now. I can't barely talk, but to know that this may end, with the FDA bearing down, and it's just infuriating. So
that's a great question. So I use the following metaphor to explain my view on set points. A friend of mine that I sail with, he has an old Model A Ford, one of those, really primitive 1930s. And if you look at the dash of one of those old cars, it has all sorts of things on the dash that aren't on a modern car, like spark advance and choke and like knobs and dials that now the computer takes care of. And I think of set point like that set point, you're asking the human to make a very difficult calculation of, subject to the current level of variability in my diabetes, how low should I make my target to expose myself to a certain fraction of hypoglycemia? And if you have wider variation, you're going to want to bias that set point up higher. So you're actually asking a human. I wouldn't try and do it myself because you've got this, what's called an asymmetric cost function. It's very asymmetric, the risk of hypoglycemia versus hyperglycemia. If it weren't asymmetric, it would be easy, but it's hard. So as you might, like, let's say you start with very high variation when you first go on to an AID system, you would want to have a high target because you were still going to be exposed to some hypoglycemia. But as you learn, as the system learns, that variation might go down, in which case you can move your target closer to hypoglycemia. So I see this as the spark advance and the choke of an old-fashioned car, that is something that is going to be replaced by a computer, where you basically say, I'm prepared to expose myself to 5% risk of hypoglycemia. Now you go figure out what my set point should be for that to happen.
Boy, that would be wonderful.
That is a fascinating proposition.
Wow, my head's buzzing on that one. So let me ask you one more question, because again, proactive people, obviously anxious people that we will lose what we have. If we were to put an effort into some sort of advocacy, I know several of us can be very loud, and organized, we can be a little bit louder, but we're not a huge group. Ben West has been pushing to say we need to do something. Any ideas of what we should do?
So first of all, I want to give well, props to Ben for all the advocacy he's done, and also props to the FDA. They're in such a huge challenge right now. Like even before COVID, they had a difficult situation, and I've been so impressed by what Courtney and her team have done over the past 5 years with really listening to the community and showing up at the DData exchange and presenting about patient choice and other outcome measures besides A1C. Like time in range wasn't even a thing when I stumbled onto the scene 10 years ago. And so I think that really regarding the FDA as being on the same side of the table and saying we're on a journey together, and how can we help each other? Because I think their heart is absolutely in the right place. And if we can just continue to show them that, hey, there is this balance, this trade-off, and we need to have the right measures in place for measuring burden. We need to allow flexibility in the way that these devices are regulated, that people can make this choice, because 70% of people are choosing not even to use a pump right now. 70% are choosing not even to use a CGM right now. So we need to find a way to bridge to that cohort.
Yeah, I think we feel very much in pain when we realize how little a lot of the country and a lot of the world have access to technology. And just yesterday someone said, or this at lunch today, someone said, I hate my CGM. I just turn off all the alarms. And someone's husband said, I hate when her alarms go off. And it's startling to me to hear that, because my husband says, no, this is why we are doing as well. But I get it. And I think that's an important demographic to work towards, because no one should be unmanaged the way they are. But we want to hightail it into the part that I'm sure if you asked a group here, would they volunteer to be testing on your group, you'd probably see a lot of hands go up. And very often we do some local trials, and I say, I'll just fall on the sensor. I'll just fall on the infusion set. Let me just bring it to my house and I'll do it. So, yeah, we are early adopters.
I just how many infusion sets we've fallen on these last couple of years, huh, Joanne?
Yeah. I want to thank you.
Let's
say it again.
I have a delay. There's one more question from Ben's dad, which is, are there parts of the interoperable AID solution that can be shared with other diseases? Is that like a potential solution to one of these problems that we're
what a great question. And one of my other projects right now is on neonatal oxygenation feedback control. So helping neonates who don't have a fully developed cardiovascular pulmonary system yet. And it's an amazing parallel with diabetes, because they have time and range challenges as well. If you give a baby too much oxygen, they go blind. If you give them too little oxygen, well, you know what happens. So back to how can we help the FDA? It's like talking to a different group. It's like talking to a different regulator. The level of expectation they have in the neonatal oxygenation around interoperability, around computer modeling and simulation, it's amazing to me how different the posture is. So I think, and even interoperability, if you look at some of these other medical devices, there's standards for those that were developed in other branches of the FDA that we're not currently using in in the diabetes branch. So when we refer to the FDA as this monolithic thing, it's not. It's full of people doing their own thing. And how do we help even distribute some of that future a little more evenly within the FDA? How do we help it percolate from the Office of Science and Engineering Labs and the work that Tina Morrison is doing to the diabetes branch? I think there's a huge opportunity learning. And the last way I'll answer that question, I got invited to present at the Anesthesia Technology Conference 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, because there's a perception in the medical device community that diabetes is 10 years ahead of all of the other disease states with respect to automation, which I find just shocking. But I guess we are in terms of automation. So I think there are all sorts of other disease states that could benefit from closed loop that we're only just now starting to see, like neonatal oxygenation, like ventilation, like anesthesia, anesthetics, because what is it called? Hypnosis is the sensor for anesthesia. And where's your hypnosis sensor? It's like a CGM. It's still very immature, trying to figure out just how knocked out is somebody based on their brain waves. So as the sensors get better, then we can start to automate things that haven't been automated before.
So exciting. Thank you, Lane. I thank you for all your time on a Sunday night. I know you're busy. You're amazing. People are wanting to know when you're doing a TED Talk.
Next week, actually, I'm giving a TED Talk on next Sunday.
Are you really? What's your topic?
It's the things I've learned going from 5 domains.
Okay.
Like, how do you jump? Like, when you jump from 5 domains, like I couldn't have jumped into diabetes and made the contributions that I'm making, small as they are, if I hadn't done it 4 other times.
Wow. Okay. We'll watch for it. We'll have to do. Seriously, thank you. When you said yes, I just got real excited, and I appreciate everything you've done. I think Hayden's a lucky young man, and to have such caring parents. And people are already saying, I'm going to watch this again. I'm going to watch this over and over again. So thank you. I wish you just all good stuff as you move forward. And if you need anything from us, ask us.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's I was looking back at the people you've had before, and I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. You've developed an amazing community, and thank you for everything that you've done.
Thank you. Please be safe when you run.